Hi everyone, Dumb Dog Duke here. I'm a big Disventure Camp fan, and I wanted to see what people were thinking about the upcoming fans versus favorites season. So far, I've seen a lot of speculation and discussion on the favorites, which makes sense considering, well, they're the favorites, they've been on before, you know. But that being said, I'd like to discuss some other things, like what we know is the location, potential formats, etc. I also wanted to discuss the fans a bit more thoroughly than I've seen them discuss to this point. Let's go ahead and start our discussion of all the extraneous information before we get into the characters. Starting off with the location. This location truly feels like a different vibe from any other place Disventure Camp's gone before. Whereas the first three seasons felt more in a location truly just akin to Total Drama, and Carnival of Chaos was truly its own creation. Saluna Island feels like it's taking more of a page out of the book of traditional Survivor. Back when Survivor changed locations every season and you got these more traditional tropical islands. And I think this is following a broader trend of Odd Nation cartoons trying to transition Disventure Camp into being its own parody of Survivor rather than continuing to be seen as a fan show that was spun off from Total Drama. And I think that'll only serve them legally and financially, as becoming further detached from Total Drama reduces the chance of a bad faith lawsuit. I think you can see this in moves like Kristal being disassociated from Chris McLean, as well as the creators saying that they'd be interested in trying other themes Survivor has done, like Blood versus Water or Heroes versus Villains. I think that's the right thing to do personally. Cutting off any attachment to Total Drama and allowing themselves to do their own thing will also just allow themselves to not be bogged down by the tropes and cliches of Total Drama and allow them to make more compelling TV, in my opinion. That being said, though, I am curious if this is going to be the start of us switching locations every season. If that were the case, I think that would be interesting. I do hope we get to return to certain locations again. The Stawaki Carnival was such a unique and cool set piece to have a season in, and I think it would be such a shame to not have a second season set there. However, as for Saluna Island itself, we don't have too much information other than it seeming to be tropical and not having any sort of human settlement or anything there. I think we're going to continue to see the trend of the locations influencing the challenges. And as such, one of my predictions is that we may get even more water challenges than we did in Carnival of Chaos. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the challenges this season have to do with surviving or coping with this new environment, maybe learning more about Saluna Island. The only fear I have with this setting is I can't help but remember back with the Total Drama fandom when we had a new island unveiled after we had spent much of our time at another location. Of course, referring to Pacateo Island. And I am not expecting Disventure Camp to have some goofy Pacateo Island-esque reveal in their season. However, I do have that twinge of fear in the back of my head, and if that is a thing, I hope it only affects the plot of the season for like one or two episodes. That being said, though, I do feel really positive about the setting. I think it's a good step, and it makes me feel confident for the season. Now, as for the format, there are 24 contestants and 26 episodes. Some people think we may have a non elimination episode the first episode, and otherwise simply have an elimination cycle every episode. I strongly disagree with this. I know we haven't had double elimination since season 1, but with this many contestants, I truly believe season 5 will have double eliminations. Before we get into that, though, I just want to talk about the team arrangements for a second. It's been confirmed by staff that there's going to be 2 teams of 12, and honestly, that gives me pause. Survivor, the show which Disventure Camp seems to most be emulating, oftentimes has a lot of trouble fitting 18 contestants into their 90-minute long episodes. Obviously, one of these is a reality show, and the other is a scripted show based on a reality show. However, that coupled with Disventure Camp's love of getting its staff involved in storylines give me pause how they're going to get 25 plus characters at the beginning to be balanced effectively. And the reason why I say this in relation to the teams aspect is, at least in Survivor and in Disventure Camp in the past, in my opinion at least, with smaller multiple teams like the three teams of six in Disventure Camp or Survivor, contestants have less places to hide. They're forced to play the game more. And also, they're forced to be a lot more involved in the edit because each vote matters twice as much on a 6-person team than it does on a 12-person team. That's why, in my opinion, it's imperative for there to be a non-elimination episode to start off the season, just so we can actually get the chance to get to know any of the fans. Ideally, we should get 2, maybe even 3 favorite boots before we lose a fan. Disventure Camp's lucky in the fact that there are several good choices for early boots on the favorite side, just because many of them have gone deep on 2 different seasons. However, if we start off with a fan being eliminated, I don't know how we're not going to have that fan just sort of feel like an underdeveloped character. I also truly hope that this is the first season we get a true Survivor-style team swap with everyone getting shuffled, not just like one person. Disventure Camp has yet to do one, and what better season to have the first than A, the one that Kristal hosts, and B, this season being themed after a previous Survivor season, which also had a pre-merge team swap. Considering how many people there are, I think a team swap anywhere between 14 to 18 people left would be appropriate. I'd argue that it would be more enjoyable to get to see how the fans and the favorites would interact if they're forced to be on teams together just before merge, maybe for 4 or 5 episodes. Now, before I start off with cast discussions, it's important to acknowledge that a lot of this is theorizing based solely off of designs and cast photos and what little information has been found. A lot of this will probably be proven false by the time the season's ended. However, it's fun to speculate, and I haven't seen anyone really discussing the fans super duper in depth. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started with Aura. First off, I know a lot of people think the fan designs are a bit too much. I'm not really worried about that because the designs are going to be edited before the season started, and even from the initial photos to the cast photo we have now, they look a lot better. I really enjoy Aura's design as well. I think they're going for a mean girl kind of thing, fashion-wise, and most people who've seen her kind of agree that she's likely going to be an antagonist, considering how Disventure Camp in the past often signals who might be villains with those sinister facial expressions they're making in the photos. And you can see her and Finn directly making eyes like they may be intending to work together. Additionally, I could see her working with some of the other more, I guess, quote-unquote conventional or normal characters on her team, like Sam or Bruno, perhaps. I could also see her maybe having some sort of villain alliance on her team with a few of the other characters, including Finn, as well as maybe Evie or maybe Nura, depending on how things work with her. I think I could see Aura playing herself up as an underdog to the other fans, but sort of playing that behind-the-scenes villain. Should she find herself on a team with some of the favorites, I think she's mainly going to be working with some of the villains, or some of the favorites who are willing to be villainous already, such as Spencer, Fiore, Alec, Anastasia. And I can also see her feuding with the next contestant I'm going to be talking about. Moving on to Aubrey. Now, I'm just going to get this out of the way first. Yes, we all agree she looks like Enid from Wednesday. Everyone's pointed that out. Now that that's out of the way, I think it's fair to expect Aubrey to be one of those eccentric, sort of quirky kind of characters. She seems like she could be similar to Tristan as far as having that sort of alternative aesthetic, but very sort of love and life and very sort of happy in their presentation. I could see her potentially being easy to manipulate. She looks a bit naive. I could definitely see Aura manipulating her into them working together. I also think Aubrey will naturally want to work with people who have that sort of quirky thing going on already. For me, that could be Dunya, Manu, Nura, Olivia, or Ren. She's also a natural underdog, and I think she'll fit in with those characters who other people might overlook as well, like Ernesto, Olivia, Bruno, or Ren. Overall, unless something weird happens, if it's a strict 12 versus 12 format for the teams, then I believe Aubrey is in until at least the late pre-merge. If she's on a team with fans, then I believe she would be happy to work with a lot of them. but I think I could see her working with Gabby, Tom, Aiden, or Lake, Natalia, Benji, or even Allie. All of these characters have something odd or kind of off about them as far as socialization goes or backstory, or are friends with people like that in Tom's case. I feel like I could also mention the idea I've heard of Aubrey and Nura having some kind of dark gothic scene romance. And I think that'd be interesting, but I think a lot of people are expecting Nura and Dunya and Aubrey and Olivia to be the romances after the cast photos dropped. Overall, I feel like she has a lot better chance of making it further than the next character I'm going to be discussing. Moving on to Bruno. I see Bruno as one of the two biggest underdogs on this cast. He looks very polite and unintimidating. However, I do fear for his long-term success. I could see Bruno being an early snipe in either scenario of this being an all fans team or him ending up on a mixed team in a swap. That being said, I do see a few avenues of success for him. I think he has a few other characters within the fans team who would be natural allies for him in Ren and Aubrey, especially since they both have that underdog thing going on for him. I can also see other characters taking him under his wing. Maybe you have your older characters like Manu, Ernesto, or even Evie deciding to take him under their wings and see how far they can drag him along. If he is on a team with favorites, I think he'll be eaten alive by any of the villains who are competent. He seems like one of the easiest to manipulate based off of what we know about him. I think Tom, Aiden, Lake, Allie, Rosa Maria, Benji, or Natalia would be characters willing to help him and not simply just manipulate him. And honestly, I do think the character after him does stand a better chance of making a deep run. Moving on to Dunya. Dunya's honestly a bit of a question mark from me because I can't tell from her design as well as from the cast photo if her build is meant to be more evocative of, a more chubby character like Natalia and Richard, or if she's meant to be like sort of your stronger strong woman type, Marissa or Logan. Because in both photos, you can't really see below maybe her chest. So it's kind of hard to tell, but if she is in that strong woman archetype, then I do think she will be a contender for a great challenge threat. I also think she has this sort of new age, sort of hippie vibe with her various gems, pearls, her sun earring. If she is this sort of athletic, new age type woman who I believe she is, then I think she has a great chance of working with a lot of people on her team. I could see her, Sam, and Manu being a sort of physical trio that carries a theoretical all-fan team. I also think, based off of her and Nura's design, as well as the way they're looking at each other in the promo, it's obvious they're going to have some kind of dynamic. Whether that will be as friends or foes, I can't really tell yet. I feel like astrology types and goth types tend to get on really well, but it truly depends on what kind of goth and what kind of attitude Nura brings to this dynamic, because if Nura is more of your Gwen type cynical goth, then I could see her and Dunya butting heads, but if Nura is much more in that chill Tristan vein, then I could definitely see her and Dunya getting along quite well. I could also see Dunya getting along with Olivia, Aubrey, and Ren due to them also having the sort of out there aesthetics, but still having that sort of positivity, love and light, almost Claire's energy to them. Ren to a much lesser extent. If she is into astrology, like I think she is, then I believe her and Rosa Maria or her and Natalia would both be really close and love to discuss talking over that kind of thing. I could also see Gabby, Tom, Aiden, Lake, or Benji being friends with her on a mixed team or at Merge. I really hope she has a deep run because I love her design, and I think she potentially has a lot of interesting story to tell. Moving on to Ernesto. Ernesto is an old man who seems like he might be trying to be like that old, rugged explorer man type who's seen a lot of things. Maybe he did some research in his old days. I'm not sure. He looks like he could be an adventurer. He may have a similar trajectory to Miriam or Richard, where people doubt their capabilities and physical challenges, and then he significantly outperforms his expectations. I'm having trouble deciding if he'll be more heroic or villainous, especially since Disventure Camp 4 was a lot more nuanced when it came to that kind of thing. I can kind of see him taking a few of the younger contestants under his wing and people like Aubrey, Ren, or Bruno. I could also see him and Evie having a natural alliance, especially if he goes the villainous route. Should he go the villainous route, I could also see him working closely with Ara as well. Should he be on a mixed team, I would love if he got a chance to interact with Allie, especially considering the relationship with her grandfather was very important to her, and we learn more about that in season 2 as well as the season 2 redux, which will just be coming out of when season 5 is airing. Other than Allie, I could see him getting along with Spencer, Fiore, Alec, and Benji personally. Just the characters who are generally polite and well meaning, but not like acting sort of outrageously or uncouthly. I hope Ernesto's in for the long run, but honestly, considering how Disventure Camp treats its older contestants, I don't feel great about his chances. Moving on to another character I don't have that many thoughts about, Evie. She's probably the person I'm most confident in after Ara and Finn as far as potentially playing a more villainous role. She's kind of giving a more duplicitous version of Monica from Reality Resort. I could see her coming in, talking about her experience and watching these kind of shows, and her believing that that can propel her to victory. Unfortunately, I could see her being one of the early antagonists who leave not that far into the season, like your Linda or your Emily before her return. However, if she makes a deep run, I could see her having some kind of storyline or arc where she does use her knowledge from the game to get further. As discussed previously, I could see her and Ernesto teaming up in an older alliance a la Blue Team of Season 4. I think her and Ara could have some kind of dynamic as well if they're both villains. I definitely see Ara being the one to pull one over on Evie and end up being the one to stab the other in the back first if they do form an alliance. I could also see her interacting with Olivia somewhat as well. Unfortunately, I do sort of see a Carol type trajectory for her, being more defined by characters she has bad relationships with than ones she has good ones with, so I'm gonna be honest, I am kind of nervous for our girl Evie. Moving on to Finn. Obviously, this is a surface level connection, but I have to drop the Nick comparison now. Between his sunglasses, his fancy haircut, the glare he gives, it's definitely giving that sort of posh, condescending, upper class person. He is obviously going to be a villain. Him and Ara were already giving them that we're gonna run this team look to each other in the cast photo. Otherwise, he's one of the more normie characters, so I could see him being close with a Sam or a Bruno. And this may be a little bit obvious, but should he end up on a mixed team, I feel like he's definitely going to end up working with the Spencer, Alec, Fiore trio, should that become a thing. Otherwise, I honestly don't have that much to say about him. There isn't that much to make about him, just from his design alone. If he makes a deep run, I think it's going to be as a minion to some sort of bigger villain, rather than him being the main force driving it forward. I do wonder if his design and his vibe giving so much Nick is intentional to some degree. And if that is the case, I wonder if they're trying to give us some sort of fake out about like what we know about what happened with Nick, and maybe it'll end up differently with Finn. I think that'd be an interesting direction to take it. Moving on to one of my personal favorites, Manu. I love his design. He is very handsome. I hope to God he is gay, so that in the fictional universe where I'm like a person and not a dog, and live in the Disventure Camp world, then I could theoretically have a shot with him. Okay, that being said, I could see him and Nura both having a dynamic since they have that sort of dark grunge aesthetic going on. If Nura's the apathetic edgy goth I think she might be, then perhaps Manu is the earnest alt guy who could perhaps bring Nura towards the more earnest, good side. Maybe help her realize that you can, I guess, sort of be into this aesthetic, be into this thing without being doom and gloom all the time. I could also see him being a protector or a guide for some of the less mature characters like Bruno or Aubrey. He has light villain potential just because of his alternative aesthetic, but I think he makes more sense as a hero. I could also see him potentially forming an old person alliance with Ernesto and Olivia, and Evie as well. As for the favorites, he's definitely someone I'm looking at for Aiden as far as sharing the alt aesthetic. I could also see him and Natalia getting on. Of all of the villainesque returners, I think he has the highest chance of getting along with Spencer. I'm not really sure why. I don't think Alec or Fiore would take to him, but I do believe that Spencer would. I think it's partially because I get the vibe that Alec and Fiore would judge him for his aesthetic more harshly than I think Spencer would necessarily be inclined to do. Starting off on someone else I really like, Nura. I am very biased for this diva. However, to get started, I really hope we get something similar to Ellie, where Nura ends up having a sort of anti-hero esque arc. Maybe if she did end up getting with Aubrey or Dunya, I think the dark X light aesthetic is just so nice and I love it so much. I could see her getting close with Aubrey, Dunya, Manu, or even Olivia just on virtue of their alternative aesthetics. Everything she's been in, her appearance, her visage has been very flat and calm. So I think she may be sort of a calming presence on her team as well, especially with some of the wackier characters. I see her being a swing vote at least once, and I don't necessarily think she's going to be playing it heroic the entire time. I could definitely see her working with Ara. As for the returnees, I could see her working with Spencer, Benji, Lake, Aiden, or Natalia due to their own eccentricities or being friends with people who already have that more eccentric style. I really want Nura to make a deep dive, and I really want her to potentially be the longest lasting fan. There are a lot of fans I really like, but Nura probably top of the list. Moving on to Olivia. There are a few things I wanted to talk about with Olivia first. A lot of people in the fandom were insane when they first saw how Olivia's name were spelled and were making fun of her or making fun of Odd Nation's cartoons. And just, I just want to say, like, never go to Eastern Europe, Disventure Camp fans, because you will be eaten alive. This is just so silly to me that the majority of the Disventure Camp fandom seemed to just forget that other countries with other spellings of names existed for a moment there. So that being said, yes, Olivia is Polish, and based off of her blazer, her outfit, you can tell that she also seems to very much like cats, maybe some other animals. And I think her design also denotes her potentially being awkward or quirky. You also see her arm around Aubrey in the thumbnail. So I think potentially her and Aubrey could be a couple or perhaps just close friends. I also think she'll get close with Ernesto and Manu just off of the basis of I see Olivia being the younger student, younger cast member who is more willing to talk to the older folk. And so I think she'd be willing to develop those connections with Ernesto, Manu, and Evie maybe more than the others are initially. I'd give her a decent chance of getting along with Ren, Nura, and Aubrey as well, just for having that kind of outcast vibe. I'm looking forward to the romance that seems to be hinted between Aubrey and Olivia as well. That'll be fun. Moving on to the favorites, it feels obvious that she's going to have some kind of dynamic with Gabby by virtue of her Polishness and her love of animals both being so clearly and prominently put forward. I feel like Disventure Camp themselves are wanting us to draw this sort of natural connection in our mind between Olivia and Gabby. And for that reason, I see them having some kind of dynamic between one another, whether it be a rivalry or as friends. I could see her being close with Tom because her being seemingly so similar to Gabby. And I think her being as quirky as she is could allow her to be close with Allie, Lake, or Benji as well. Moving on to Ren. I can't really tell too much about them. They've been confirmed to be non-binary, and the only thing I'm really picking up from their design is two things. The first is that they could potentially be some kind of shy character or character who's not that great at letting people see the true self, I suppose. And I just get that because there's this cliche and trope about the shy characters usually having their eyes covered by their hair. Additionally, their fashion does give me, as a gay person from the South, it does give me that sort of flamboyance that you specifically get from someone who is maybe queer of some kind and lets that queerness show in a more rural context, especially in the cast photo with the overalls and the midriff showing and the crop top. I think it all very much gives queer southern or queer rural folk vibe. And so that's really the kind of archetype I'm expecting. I could see them getting along with the other quirky people I've talked about, like Nura, Manu, Aubrey, Olivia. I could also see them and Bruno potentially having some kind of underdog pact, underdog alliance. They do seem a bit more odd than Bruno, so I think they're less likely to be taken under someone's wing, especially someone like Evie, who may be somewhat judgmental. But I do think Bruno and Ren could potentially be taken under the wing of someone like a Manu or an Ernesto at the very least. I think Ren will also have an easy time fitting in with characters like Gabby or Benji, should they make it to merge. I could also see Ren potentially being close to Lake, being two people who potentially both have a storyline around needing to potentially open up and allow themselves to sort of exist more in the environment they're in. Moving on to Sam. Sam is unfortunately the person I got the absolute least from. He seems like he could be the sort of Logan or Tom, big, athletic, sort of himbo archetype. I could see him working with Finn or Ara just by virtue of being the cool kid looking group that tends to work together in shows like these. I could definitely see him being manipulated by Finn and Ara as well. He gives me early out energy potentially, similar to Seth from Reality Resort. I don't particularly see Sam getting the chance to go far enough to meet a favorite, but should he, I think he'll get along with Tom or Aiden the most. But honestly, I think he'd get along with any of the more heroic favorites. He just seems like a somewhat boring, agreeable guy, and for that reason, I don't really foresee him lasting that too long. Ending off our discussions on the fans before we get into the favorites, I just wanted to do a little intermission before we talk about the favorites individually to sort of talk about the selections on a broader sense that I think would be better before getting into any individual characters. This is a real mixed bag for me as far as distribution of the favorites. Having 7 of the 8 characters from season 1 and 2 be people who competed on All-Stars is a tad disappointing. We had All-Stars just before Carnival of Chaos, and it would have been great to see more Carnival of Chaos representation amongst the favorites, given how none of them have gotten a second chance compared to our season 1 or 2 contestants. In my opinion, a split of 6 contestants from season 4 and 3 from 1 and 2 would have been more ideal, especially considering most of the Gen 1 and 2 cast are getting their third appearance again. I just can't help but feel like there's a wealth of characters from season 4 who are legitimate fan favorites, like Ted, Tristan, or Ivy, who really could have benefited from a second outing. That being said, I do have to be real. There were a lot of people clamoring for contestants like Carol or Dan from season 1 and 2, and while I love both of them, having any kind of fan base is different from being a fan favorite. There are some characters from Carnival of Chaos who are pre-boots and are legitimate fan favorites, but some of the characters the fandom were upset about not seeing was a little odd to me, in my opinion. And I also just want to take a chance to take an aside and say, the hate for some of the contestants that did make the cast is a little odd to me as well. I see people claiming that Aiden should not be a fan favorite when Aiden has been one of the biggest characters in the Disventure Camp fandom since the Season 2 beta dropped. I find Aiden a little generic and a little boring, personally, but it would be lying to say he's not a fan favorite. He's objectively a fan favorite. And the same thing goes for Allie. Odd Nation cartoons have shown that Allie is bringing in the most money from greetings, and so by that metric at least, I'm not sure how else you could measure popularity. at least for something like this. Allie is at least very popular in that one regard, which also happens to be a regard which helps the company make more money to continue making the show. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and discuss the favorites in elimination order from their original seasons. So let's go ahead and start with Gabby. Gabby. I am so excited to see Gabby exist on a season outside of the context of her or her development or her storyline being tied to her relationship with Ellie. They haven't handled her alter situation the best before. And when Ellie has not been a part of the storyline, that part of Gabby has tended to take center stage. So I am worried for the writers continuing to have the ability to give this topic the sensitivity it needs. However, apart from that ickiness, Gabby is such a beloved character that you have no choice but to put her in fans versus favorites. I think it could be interesting if Tom or Aiden were a little distrustful or upset with her over the events of All Stars. However, given the general vibe between Gabby and Tom in Tom Jake 1 and 2, it does not seem like Tom is going to have any sort of lasting emotions towards Gabby. So as such, I think it'd be interesting if they explored that with Aiden somewhat. I feel like this season will really develop the Gabby-Tom dynamic and help us explore what that looks like without the Jake and Ellie of it all being a looming shadow over their friendship. And I think Gabby will be much more of a hero than she was in her All-Stars appearance. I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up teaming with Natalia or Benji as well. That being said, if Spencer thought Natalia was too much, then I have a hard time seeing him getting along with someone even more bombastic like Gabby. Moving on to Tom. I'd be surprised if he doesn't make at least merge, considering how close Tom Jake 2 is to the release of Fans vs. Favorites. He's obviously going to end up working with Aiden and Gabby, whether that's together or separately, I haven't decided yet. I could also potentially see him and Gabby being willing to bury the hatch with Alec and Fiore, depending on how Alec and Fiore are written this season. It doesn't feel exceptionally likely, but I wanted to bring up the possibility of Alec and Fiore both trying to quote-unquote make amends and not be villains anymore. I don't think it'll happen, but it's an interesting possibility. There's also some potential for Tom to be some kind of mentor to Spencer, given that Spencer shares some of the self-sabotaging traits that Jake had to a lesser degree. I could definitely see Tom seeing Jake in Spencer. Additionally, I think Spencer would be annoyed by that and see Tom as some like annoying butting in guy who needs to mind his own business, but eventually they become close. I also feel like Tom and Benji will be a natural alliance just because one of them's a himbo and one of them's like a goofy dork. I don't know, that feels like a very logical sort of tie-in. Moving on to my favorite Disventure Camp character, Alec. He's definitely who I'm most excited to see return. Seeing him return with Fiore will be interesting. And seeing how their father-daughter relationship develops in the context of this game, as well as how it's developed outside of the context of the game, will be much more interesting. I think Season 4 focused a lot more on developing the characters' inner worlds than Seasons 1 through 3 did. And I feel like Alec and Fiore are two characters that definitely warrant this exploration. I'm curious what an Alec who's got more of his life together and is working towards taking care of and helping someone looks like. Seeing more of that father-daughter dynamic develop will be really interesting to see, and I think it could lead to a natural storyline with Rosa Maria being there, being a mother, and seeing that Alec needs help and Alec is trying to be better. Rosa's always been very sympathetic to people like that anyways. So I really would be interested for Rosa Maria to sort of give her perspective and give her guidance to Alec on parenthood. Speaking of Fiore is someone I'm also hoping to make a deep run this season. I'm hoping the season will get more into what it's like growing up for someone as advanced mentally as Fiore is, as well as the fact that Fiore's childhood at this point has kind of been irrevocably intertwined with reality TV. I think there are a lot of interesting things you could do with the implications of what that might do for her mental development, as well as add that with the fact that we know her parents hate her, and meeting her adoptive father on that same show. I think Fiore is a character that absolutely warrants a third visit. Exploring her relationship with Alec will be interesting, as well as Rosa Maria taking a liking to her, maybe being concerned for her as a mother, and offering her some guidance. I could also potentially see Fiore working with Spencer and Anastasia, considering Anastasia is Fiore's favorite player and Spencer is Alec's favorite player. Should Allie decide to go to the villainous route again, I also feel like she'll end up working with Fiore, considering that was almost a thing in season 3. Overall, I mean, she's Fiore. She needed to be on a fans versus favorite season, and I think she is probably the most important character for Odd Nations cartoons to do right by. If they screw up whatever they have planned for Fiore on season 5, it will be bad. She is one of the most important characters to the series, and I hope they are thinking about that and thinking about her as they're writing her, because I love Fiore. I think everyone loves Fiore. She kind of made Disventure Camp in season 1, so hopefully she gets that sort of respect in season 5. Moving on to our season 2 cast. I think these picks for fan favorites are all pretty predictable. I'm looking forward to seeing all of them again. With Rosa Maria's inclusion, we'll now have had every merger from season 1 and 2 return. If that's indicative of the future, I wouldn't be surprised if we see most of the mergers from season 4 returning in some capacity within the next few seasons as well. I do think there's a conversation to be had about whether or not another season for all returners who made the merge was necessary. I think a second chances type season with people like Lil, Carol, or Ted could be really fun. Additionally, I think it's worth saying that the season 2 cast discussion will have an asterisk on them, considering the season 2 remaster that's updating right now that hasn't completely finished. There's only 2 episodes left, so I don't think anything too significant will change. However, do just keep that in mind with the context of the conversations of Rosa Maria and Aiden. I have enjoyed the season 2 remake and how it's allowed Rosa Maria and Allie to both exist more outside of their relationships with other characters than they did in the original season 2 beta. That being said, let's go ahead and start with Lake. Lake is someone I'm really interested in seeing how she develops on season 5. She left on a bit of a low note on All Stars, as well as being an early merge boot on her original season. So, given the cast of characters, she is probably most due for a deep run out of any of the 3-time returners, in my opinion. I definitely see her and Benji potentially relating to one another, with their parents pushing them to succeed and the pressure that comes with that. And I also think there's a big connection with her and Fiore as well, given that they both lost their relationships with their parents, and their relationship with their family was probably made a lot worse by the nature of their involvement in the show. And I think the two of them could really bond over that fact. I'd also love to see Gabby and Lake get to bond some, seeing as they're from similar parts of the world and they've both got that somewhat quirky side to them going on. There isn't a returnee who I'd give Lake zero chance of working with, just by the nature of how social she is. Honestly, I think Lake's a winner pick. With the season 2 remake coming right before as well, I feel like the season 2 transition from Lake just having lost to her doing well in season 5, it just feels obvious and it makes sense in my opinion. Moving on to my gamer queen diva Allie. Prepare for a rant. Number 1 Allie lover here. I'm not saying you have to like Allie, but if you were one of the people who is saying she is not a fan favorite, you are lying to yourself. I am sorry. She is a fan favorite. People like her. Just because you don't like her, or just because of the website you were on that does not like her, there are plenty of people out there who are Allie fans, and there are plenty of people out here who are Huntess Allie fans, and I think Allie makes perfect sense as a favorite pick. Granted, I know a lot of people didn't like her towards the end of All Stars, but I'll just point out that by the Final Four, Allie was the winner pick for most of the fandom. By the time of the Final Four of All Stars, most people wanted Allie to win. Let me just make that clear. There was some people who wanted Connor to win. There were some people who didn't by nature of him being a boot, but people were really done with Jake. And there were some people who were okay with the idea of Rhea winning, but I think we all agree that the execution of Rhea winning ended up being a bit muddied, unfortunately. That being said, though, I am personally preparing for Allie to be an early boot of season 5. I think a lot of people are going to see her naturally aligning with and spending time with Benji, especially given their interaction in the cast photo. I do think it's telling as well that Allie is the only season 2 competitor, not directly near all of her season 2 friends. She's off to the side in the very corner with Benji, not with anyone from her season. I definitely foresee her and Aiden still having some conflict there, given that Allie essentially orchestrated Aiden's boot in All Stars. I do think it would be fun to see her interact with Spencer as well. Season 4 Spencer, it made it clear that he's really insecure and he wasn't in the best place with his emotions or dealing with the things he needed to do with his partners, as well as being worried about what other people might think of him. Allie had a whole arc about learning to deal with that kind of stuff, as well as her dealing with her issues with Hunter. I could see Allie also being an ally or someone who Spencer at least vents to or relates to in that way. I could see the two of them both being in that sort of gray area between a hypothetical heroes alliance and villains alliance. I think Allie being the Amelie to Spencer's Hannah, as weird as that sounds, where they help each other with their issues, in my opinion, that is the ideal for an Allie early boot on season 5. That would be ideal for me. That being said, though, moving on to Rosa Maria. My, what a transformation the season 2 rewrite has given her. She went from being essentially just a therapist character to someone who has her own depth and has her own issues as well. And I must say, I really like her voice acting in the reboot as well. Her original voice actress was good, but I really enjoy her reboot voice actress. Again, I think her having some time where she teaches Alec to be a dad could be funny, could be fun, could be cute. I think she'll have a ton of allies from season 2, as she's already friends with all of them except Allie. And I do not foresee Rosa Maria being unable to get along with Allie. I think she's been fleshed out more and more in season 2, but I hope something that would be interesting to do in season 5 with her that's sort of leading into this is sort of going into why Rosa Maria feels the need to help people compulsively as much as she does, and maybe tying that in with her backstory. I think that'd be interesting, and it would be nice to see who Rosa Maria is beyond the label of being a mother. Like, who is Rosa Maria as a person outside of her relationship to her daughter Sophia, you know? Finally, on to the last person of season 2, Aiden. Aiden is also in the category of Fiore, in my opinion, where he had to be on a season of Fans versus Favorites. He comes into the season, I believe, with the highest amount of pre-existing connections, having been a part of the Heroes Alliance with Tom and Allie before Allie betrayed him, having been friends with Lake and Rosa. He also has a connection with Amelie through their both being in Tom Jake 2. Maybe that could help him with the season 4 cast. If any character has the chance of holding a grudge from the events of All Stars, I do think it could be Aiden. I could see him distrusting both Gabby and Allie for having flipped against him in the past. I think it would be really funny if him and Natalia had some kind of interaction over the pretend it's a date with James Costa thing. I think that'd be fun. Maybe they have a play rivalry. I also think Aiden will definitely get along with Benji. He also seems like he'd be the quickest to call Spencer out for all of his shit. And I could definitely see him and Spencer beefing and that pushing him and Natalia closer. Overall, I also foresee Aiden being an early boot, but he's also such a fan favorite that regardless of however early he goes home, he always had to be on a season of Fans versus Favorites, in my opinion. Finally, moving on to our discussion of the season 4 returnees. We've got Benji, Natalia, Spencer, and Anastasia. I'm not mad about these picks, but I don't think I really could have been because Carnival of Chaos had so many amazing characters. The only one I'm a little iffy about is Anastasia, and that's just because she just had an entire season full of her. She was in every single episode. That being said, though, I'm not too upset about it. I know she'll have great interactions with Fiore, Rosa, and who knows who else. That being said, though, There are some favorites I would have loved to seen considered for season 4, like Richard or even Zaid. I think Tristan would have been fun too. I think there were a lot of people who could have taken up a men's slot, or in Tristan's case, being the second non-binary person on the cast, and then we could have a gender balance as well. And I don't think a gender balance is strictly necessary, especially in a non-scripted show like this. I do wonder how necessary Anastasia's inclusion is, and I'm curious to see if the story will prove me wrong in believing that she may not have been needed to be included. That being said, though, let's start with Benji. Benji is probably my biggest winner pick from the season 4 favorites. I would absolutely love if we finally got that Benji from zero to hero sort of storyline Hannah alluded to in season 4 about him becoming a strategic force and a good player. We already saw shades of that in season 4 with him being correct over Hannah in having should have voted Isabel and Jade over Zyvi. I hope he gets a chance to develop the real friendship that was sort of hinted at throughout season 4 with Spencer. I also think him and Natalia would get along just by virtue of Natalia loving most people who are goofy and not really rude or mean, and Benji is all of those things. I will mention Allie and him potentially having that dork alliance going on. I could also see Fiore, Alec, and Spencer roping Benji in as like a fourth vote for some sort of villain alliance. Benji will also get along with Gabby as well, both of them being sort of socially awkward weirdos. I say that lovingly, being one myself. I also think Tom and Aiden would happily take Benji under their wing. I really hope Benji at least make merge, but I truly believe we're in for a very long season of Benji, and I am all but looking forward to it. Moving on to Natalia. I love Natalia, and I'm really looking forward to see what the writers have in store for her. Season 4 has been better about this in general, but I think if anyone got the therapist character moniker, it could be her or Richard. That being said, though, I hope she gets to show a bit more agency throughout this season. A lot of her moves and reactions and things she did were either in relationship to her friendship / betrayal with Logan and Richard, or her rivalry with Anastasia. And I think it'll be nice to see her sort of moving in sort of more of a free agent status, rather than being so confined to being so obsessed with Anastasia or being so obsessed with Spencer, that kind of thing. As for storyline ideas, I would love if her and Rosa Maria got to become friends. Her and Aiden, again, having that sort of bit about the James Costa comment. I wonder if the dislike between Spencer and Natalia established in season 4 will play some kind of role. If her and Benji were to become close, I could see Benji having to sort of pick between the two of them. I wouldn't be surprised if the division between Natalia and Spencer becomes the basis for a vote, because it does not seem they would have any reason to have stopped disliking each other since the season ended. I could also see her even being manipulated or being convinced to join a more villainous alliance or villainous group if they were going after someone she was specifically angry with, like a Spencer and Anastasia. Moving on to Spencer, I'd be shocked if Alec and Fiore didn't end up aligned with him. It just seems so obvious that Spencer is going to be a part of a trio with them. Again, Spencer's dynamic with Benji will also be very important, I foresee. Anastasia and Spencer's rocky relationship will also likely form a dynamic between the two of them, whether they make up and come closer to allies like they were when Spencer maybe first joined Team Blue and helped Anastasia win the tug of war to get Linda out after initially voting to get Anastasia out. They could sort of reconcile. I think that'd be nice. I would expect Spencer and Aiden to have some kind of beef. I could definitely see Spencer either going full on more villainous, or if they wanted to, they could fully redeem him and have him be more on the hero side in season 5. I think there's a lot of different directions you could take his character, and I am very excited for it. Finally, we have Anastasia. Anastasia, I do not foresee her lasting very long. It's hard to imagine her having any allies in the season 4 representatives, except for maybe Benji. And if Spencer or Natalia get to Benji first, then that may spell even more trouble for Anastasia. If Anastasia can get to Alec and Fiore, that may work, especially if Spencer also wants to work with them. That could end up working in her favor and having them work together, or they could end up working against each other. I do think that she's likely going to be targeted by all of her season 4 counterparts. I'm not anticipating her having a long run, but I am excited to see how her fiery personality bounces off of the season 1 and 2 cast. That's it for my thoughts on the pre-information for Disventure Camp 5, fans versus favorites. This has been really fun. I've been wanting to make a video for a while, but I just never got around to it for some reason. But depending on how this is received and how much motivation I have, and a wide variety of things, you may see this dumb dog again soon. So feel free to subscribe and like if you want. Or not. I don't know how serious I am about this. Bye bye.